The aging industry and how we look after our elderly in the UK is really broken. The number of people that can actually afford state-funded care is quite low. The experience of then finding that care, understanding what those needs are, coordinating between the GP, the district nurse, your agency is very, very difficult. Because my grandfather had passed away about a year and a half before. And so I'd be looking at the space just randomly that actually there was a gap for something that was like, very modern, cloud-based, sort of deeply integrated, could really be an operating system for these care agencies and really easy to use. I think what's fascinating about where we are with healthcare generally is that generative AI is transformational, particularly in healthcare, because everything is so textual. And so the ability to really comprehend that and process that in a world where the number of doctors, the number of district nurses is decreasing and our population, particularly our aging population, is increasing, is something we will have to invest in.
Today's guest is Rajiv Tanna, co-founder of Birdie. They provide digital tools for care providers in the home. Rajiv's got a really interesting journey. That's not what you expect, where he's worked in different industries, taken a career travelling break, worked in both corporate and startup, before doing his own thing. What's really great about this episode is he's really raw about the lessons he's learned, and all the hard times too. Really hope you enjoy this episode. I'm Amma from the Bay HQ, and this podcast is powered by HSBC Innovation Banking.
So great to have you on today. And you've done so many different things in your career and Birdie's going incredibly well. But if you rewind back to the beginning, when you were growing up, what did you want to be? Did you have any idea?
Well, look, first, it's really great to be here on the podcast and have this conversation and, let people understand a little bit about my journey and how it can be helpful to them. Yeah, I mean, look, if I rewind to when I was a kid, there was these like two tracks. And I remember one, weirdly, I wanted to be a jet fighter pilot, no idea why. And maybe I say that because there's a part of me that wants to like do adventurous things, and I've traveled around the world twice and I have an ambition to like live on a boat for years. So there's like this one part of me. But the other part, and I think I remember being at school where I think the head of the sixth form said like, go down the sort of merchant banking route. I think it was mentioned. So it's like this idea that you are like building businesses, spending time sort of investing in them. And so that's always been a passion of mine. So even at 16, I think I said to myself, I'll go for a gap year when I'm 18, which I did. Got a really prestigious internship for like, pre-university, went through university and then said work in a corporate job 5 years and then I'll leave. And I had that plan pretty clear.
So you actually did that?
So I did all of that. It's really weird for me, but like when I was 16, I did all those things. What I think I didn't realize is once I got to the point of saying I want to do this thing, I hadn't really clarified what exactly it was, what type of business or what was the type of impact. So that's been the journey, I think, for the last, more like 15 years, is like trying different businesses, trying different ideas, figuring out which one I can be most impactful in. But the other part of me is I'm just really geeky and techie. I was just thinking about on the way here, like I used to play Red Alert. I used to like, hack things together where I like pulled Xboxes apart. So there's definitely been a part of me that just enjoys, innovating or pushing the boundaries through technology.
So the internship you did at 18, because obviously that's not a path many people pick, right? Usually it's a clear path is go to university and then go on from there. Yeah. What did you do in that year and why did you do that?
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, first of all, I don't know why I did that. But I was lucky enough to apply to Accenture and they had a Horizon scheme. And this was when I think, Accenture is still an incredible company, but it was right at that wave of sort of tech innovation, tech outsourcing more than innovation. And I applied to the scheme. There was 5 of us that got the offer to join. So 5 of us, luckily, in the whole of the UK got to go to this thing. And I worked in 2 different roles. And then actually during uni, I actually got brought back by one of the partners to go and work. And this was all at the time that the NHS was outsourcing all of its tech. And so I was involved in some of those, pieces of work at my age. So it was fascinating. Then I went back to uni, maths and physics. And then I pivoted because I saw my dad's an accountant and he said, well, look, this is great, this tech consulting, but like maybe you want to go down the accounting route, stability, etc. And I said, no, but I'll go and do investment banking. And so, then joined UBS Investment Bank, was in very specifically picked their tech team because I wanted to stay close to tech. But it was this balance of like the finance side and the kind of the business side and then the technology innovation side that really appealed to me.
Having that experience when you were 18, then going to university, did you feel like you were more mature for your age than I guess a lot of your peers because you'd had that experience of working that environment?
I think I had a realization of what work was about at that point. And I maybe one sort of example when I was in that 18-year-old period, I was working in a team and I was working with people who had gone through university and like were 5 years earlier than me. But actually, like it all came down to the output and the quality of what you did. It really didn't matter to the managers where you came from. And so probably that's the biggest learning I got is that you have to constantly be learning, constantly be sort of wanting to do the best job. And I know that's obviously as you get older, you've got different responsibilities, that becomes harder. But I think that's one thing it instilled in me. And yeah, I think university I enjoyed it because it was maths and physics. And so I really got to do some, really deeply kind of intellectual work. But actually, I was very happy to get back into the workplace.
So at the end of the 5 years in corporate and in investment banking, was it a case of you knew in your head, you said this plan from since you were 16, okay, this 5 years is up now.
Yeah. What
do I do? Or were you already planning what you were going to do at that stage? When did you decide what the next?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I reflect, I'm not sure I did it I definitely jumped in the deep end, and there's loads of learnings from that I probably, looking back at myself would have said, why don't you do it another way? So I actually went traveling after that 5 years. I got married and we said, we're going to go travel again. So it was really important to me that I got exposed to the broader world. And again, one learning there was like, we live in a very little bubble, particularly in London. When you go to other parts of the world, you just realize sort of what people really value and the cost of life is. So that was something that's sat within me. But I came back. I worked with an early stage founder at one point. That didn't work out as a relationship. I then sort of had to go back to work. So I worked at WorldPay for a while, for a couple of years. Then I had my own idea. And then that kind of didn't really work. And I spent a good amount of money and, learned a lot about what matters in a startup. And then ultimately I joined Yieldify, which was, a really good experience in terms of scaling. I think it was pre-Series A at that point, post-Series A, getting really involved in like all the responsibility of founding. I mean, my learning in all of that was that I knew I wanted to be in tech, and this was right when there was some really exciting things happening sort of in, startup scene. If I could have consciously decided to like join one of those companies and be close to like building, that's something I would replay, right? So like banking was really in the heyday when I started, and I think it was the place to go. But now knowing what I want to be, if I joined an early stage startup or something that was on the scale up journey, the amount of learning I would have had through that period would have been huge. Whereas it's almost been like doing that learning myself much more.
I think this is one of the things I see quite often where people have this idea that you've got to quit your job and start your own company straight away, which I don't think is true at all. And like you said, working in front of the startup first, it makes so much sense because you get to see that journey, and
I think
it's still stressful, but it's less stressful than when it's your business.
Yeah.
And that's such a good experience where you had, obviously, because you worked at other companies as well. But you mentioned there about you tried to start up something yourself and you spent a lot of money on that, which didn't work out. Can we go into that a bit more? Because I think that's something often people just miss out, is that bit where it's not always the first idea you have that works out. And sometimes you do make mistakes, lose money, and then later on you can still be successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting period. So I was at WorldPay and I thought, okay, we're in this period where everything was happening through. So WorldPay, for everyone's benefit, is the people that basically process the payments whenever you go and pay in Tesco. But this was the point where we were pre-Apple Pay, we were still using cards and we were tapping, and contactless rates were just about increasing to a point where we, there was still like 20-30%, I think, from memory. And so I thought, okay, well, look, this whole experience of going into a restaurant and splitting the bill and paying is annoying. Point of sale terminals are awful when you look at them. And so my idea at that point was like, how do I connect all these things? And, there was this sort of Bluetooth beacons at the point. So I was like, we can make this incredible experience of, you come in the restaurant and it all connects and you know what your bill is and off you go. And I thought that was a great idea. And I think and so I went, okay, great idea. I'm going to do it. I'm smart. I'm a banker. I've done this. Like, I go. And then the reality came, which is like, two things I hadn't really asked myself, like, do I really care about this problem personally? And is this a problem that's really that important right now and something that someone's going to actually pay for? And by the way, at this point, I was working out of my ex-boss's office, and the delivery team had been like literally in that office a little while before, and I spoke to some of the restaurants. So it was humbling to realize, number one, it wasn't something I really cared about that much. Number two, it wasn't really a big pain. It only really became a pain over pandemic. And then actually, if you look now, there's a lot of opportunity for sort of embedded payments in point of sale, but that's taken a 10-year journey. And number three, I think I wasn't listening enough to what the market or the customer needs. And that's just like very humbling, because you think it's the idea and you're just gonna, that's it, you're done. Actually, it's a much more kind of being open and listening and iterating and being agile as you go through this journey. I guess maybe that's a reflection on my path. It's been that, meandering through. And even today, I would say that, Birdie has achieved a lot, but there's still a lot of meandering to do to figure out where we're going to go next and how we're going to, continue to achieve the success we have.
I think that's something which a lot of first-time founders always go through, is that idea that they think is their idea, when it's not really the idea. Like I said, it's the problem. Do you care enough to keep trying different things to solve this problem? Or is that going to frustrate you? And it's hard for people to make that realization because you think it's about your idea, and it's not really about your idea at all. No. It's about the problem. Do you care enough about that problem?
Yeah.
And once you had that experience, obviously it didn't put you off going to start a company later on down the line. But after Yieldify, so you had this experience at a company which was growing and has obviously done pretty well afterwards as well. What then made you decide to take the next step or go on from there?
Yeah, I think one of the experiences of Yieldify was that I joined as like head of product and, was driving the company on the product side. And I think I used it as a really useful experience to learn how to build product and technology. So one of the things that was important to me in my career was like entrepreneurship is hard and there's very high chances it may not be successful, right? So that's the first thing people need to admit, because it's really easy to say, look at these amazing people that have done it. And so I also wanted to have like a strong sort of skill set. And I think for me, pivoting from banking, yes, you could go down the CFO path. I wanted to get close to the customer and solving the problem. So product engineering was really important. So that was the first step. I think at the back end of Yieldify, one learning for me was that I wanted to own my own thing and drive my own thing. And so there wasn't, I think the business had got to a point where it wasn't that the right place for me to be there anymore. Again, I had young kids at the time. I have all the kind of responsibilities. So, pivoted to then working at ASOS for a couple of years just to get some experience. And then in reality, what was happening in the background is I was constantly talking to founders and exploring and looking for people to meet and work with, because my skill set is like, I would say, bridging that kind of the person who loves the problem with how do we solve the problem through the product and technology. And I see this a lot. Like a lot of people have this idea, but there's quite a lot between the idea and actually getting it, tested, validated through to market. And so, that led to Birdie, right? And Birdie eventually was this opportunity where I met Max, my co-founder, and Abid, also my co-founder. And they had this broad idea of like, the aging industry and how we look after our elderly in the UK is really broken. And you can look at all the stats around that. How do we solve for that problem? And I was lucky enough to join them at a point where, they had got some early funding, they had this idea, they'd pitched it, but they needed someone to like figure out how to make this a business and pivot it. And so that was, perfect what I was looking for. And then on top of that, my parents have a care home, my broader family have care home. And inside me, there's always been this desire to do something that has social impact and not just a commercial benefit to me. And so, it's very rare that you find a business that can do high growth, sort of really interesting problem space, like from a technical product perspective, but also thirdly, like genuinely is going to be impacting, hundreds and thousands of people's lives. And that's, I think, what I find unique about what we've built so far.
We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We just want to give a quick shout out to our headline partners, HSBC Innovation Banking. One of the biggest challenges for so many startups is finding the right bank to support them. Because you might start off and try to use a traditional bank, but they don't understand what you're doing. You're just talking to an AI assistant, or you're talking to somebody who doesn't really understand what it is you've been trying to do. HSBC have got the team they've built out over years to make sure they understand what you're doing, they've got the deep sector expertise, and they can help connect you with the right people to make your dreams come true. So if you want to learn more, check out hsbcinnovationbanking.com. What's interesting as well, because you mentioned about your young kids and taking that option, which is a bit more safe in terms of making sure they all secure there, and then going into another startup where you said there's risk involved. What was that trigger that said, okay, you said the different things are quite aligned, but I guess it's quite hard for many people listening sometimes where they've got kids, they've got responsibilities, to then choose to take their leap. What reassured you about Birdie and the team to decide, okay, this is something worth me taking this risk?
That's a really good question. I think I was reassured by the team because they're super smart, they're super capable, really driven. I also thought I could fit with them in terms of skill sets that I was bringing, and I think that's really important. I think people can found individually, but I think that requires an enormous sacrifice and enormous capability, and it's relatively rare from what I've seen. So, having a team of originally 4 of us, someone on the technical side, someone who was like the visionary entrepreneur and could really compel the market. Where it's healthcare, you need to be able to deal with a lot of people outside of just your day-to-day business. And then someone who's commercial was a really cool fit. And so I feel like I could, slot in there, add value. There was a click in terms of how we operated and worked. On the other side, I can't say that sometimes when I look back, I haven't just taken crazy risks that I'm not sure many other people would. They're not the most sensible all the time. And in retrospect, I'm sure if I take other paths might have happened in life, it would be different. But I think when I think about it more, like there's just a part of me that enjoys that. And back to my early days, building businesses, being fighter, that's a part of who I am. And so the real question for me is like, how do you balance that with your other aspirations and wants, whether that's, family, etc. Now those balances are different for different people, but for me, it didn't seem that difficult a risk to take. And to be honest, I'd also managed my life in a way where I could afford to take those risks and not have any real impact on my day-to-day life. I mean, we're very privileged here. So the risk is on your personal side is not that high. The question is, do you have the willingness to commit to the effort, the energy, the resilience that you're going to have, because any business is hard, right? And so that's kind of the way I think about it.
And you mentioned how you're still meandering in some aspects, but obviously you've done quite a lot of meandering so far. Can you talk about that journey as well? So obviously once you joined, you're now trying to work out, okay, what's the best way to solve this problem we're trying to deal with? What are some of the things you tried and how has that pivoted over time?
You mean for Birdie specifically?
Yeah.
So I think at the beginning, Birdie was actually a B2C product. So the idea was that if you are, the loved one of someone who is receiving care at home or needs care at home, how do we support you to monitor your loved one better and feel, comfort that they're being looked after? And that was all about sensors and connectivity. And so that was before I joined. I guess my realization was we're a bunch of founders that don't know about social care and healthcare. We're very early. We haven't got any traction. We are burning some money here. So I suggested we pivot to being a SaaS business and looking at the market. And I'd done actually weirdly some research the year before because my grandfather had passed away about a year and a half before. And so I'd been looking at the space just randomly that actually there was a gap for something that was very modern, cloud-based, sort of deeply integrated, could really be an operating system for these care agencies and really easy to use. So, suggested we pivot there. Become a SaaS business. I think from that point onwards, it's been relatively good for quite a while. We executed really effectively for 3 or 4 years, and I think we just got lots of traction. Our growth really grew, and it was because there was such a need in the market for this problem. So for that first product, we had massive PMF. I think where the journey is more interesting now is building your first product and launching that really successfully is very different to both building your second or third products. And in our case, it's all about how these products compound on each other, but also it's a totally different experience building a team versus building, the first product. And so that has been more where the meandering and the life journeys come. And I think when you look at people who've been more in the kind of grown in a company, a large company, those skills that they've absorbed by managing more people, managing big projects are very different than the skills that you typically have when you are a founder building something, with a team of 3 or 4. So it's more that meandering of how do you evolve yourself for this next phase of the business, rather than the business itself.
You mentioned that how you executed their first product really well. What are some of the things that Birdie did that meant that you really captured the market really quickly?
If I look at the business, there was a few things. So one was speed of execution on the product. I just think if you have a really aligned, product engineering team that can go fast, there's nothing beyond that. And that's quite hard to do in my experience. I think it's possible, but it's quite hard to do. Second is, we were obsessed with sort of the bar of quality, the brand. And so, yes, Birdie has an element, which is the product, but we also talk about the partnership. We talk about the support we give, we overinvest in that. And all of that fits under this brand, which says that we're not here to just sell you software. We're here to partner with you to evolve the way that care is delivered in the community so that we can, yes, make you more efficient, but we can make the quality of care much better for the people that are receiving care, because that's what our mission is, not to sell you software. So that really worked. I think in terms of actually how you do that, as someone who is not an engineer and has no idea about healthcare, if I look back at it, I tried really hard to get an extremely good, engineering leader around me. I wanted to make sure that we had someone who was a GP or had a healthcare background, and also someone from the care sector. And then a really good designer, because I have a lot of belief that design thinking can solve these problems, or at least iterate quickly on solving these problems and learn quite quickly. All of the magic was putting those people together and setting up the right, vision, processes, inspiration, just being an enthusiastic sort of founder and saying, this is what we can achieve, let's go. That was a lot of it. I take very little credit for what we did, if I'm being honest. I think it was more pulling people together and driving them.
You mentioned there about the partnerships with the providers as well. So care home is obviously quite a traditional industry. There could be, I'm just assuming here, that there'll be some pushback in terms of people want to keep things the way they are. If it's not broken, don't fix it, or they're almost intimidated by the software and like, how is this going to actually benefit us?
Yeah.
Is this the right choice or not? How do you overcome some of those hurdles of getting people to trust Birdie, especially in the early days, to become those initial customers and come on board and trust that you had their back?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And by the way, like that's sort of the challenge of our business, right? It's like it will take time for this to happen. It's not like one of those things where there's hundreds of thousands customers out there and you can just sell to someone out there. Like it's a relatively constrained sort of market, so it will take time. But in the early days, I think there was such pain with the way things were being done and the alternative softwares that had been created historically. So on the pain, if you think about someone going into a home to deliver care, and if that's all done on paper, number one, you have to figure out how they get there. Then they have to go into the home with all the right keys, etc. Then they have to do all the work that's there, including medication delivery, which is something that's something that UK industry does, and then also log all the notes. Now that's great. This is like remote employees before we even had the pandemic. They then go around and do loads of those shifts. And you, as someone who employs all these people, are sitting in an office with zero visibility of what's happened in that location, have no idea if the meds have been missed, etc. You just have to go on faith, right? And at this point, by the way, most people were just dialing in, saying, I'm there, and that was it. So when you come along and say, look, we're going to give you a safe platform that's going to let you monitor the meds being given, understand what information is coming back from that home, what tasks were delivered, and you can get real-time visibility on that. And you can feel much more confident that the care is of the quality you want, and you can be responsive to what's happening. That's meaningful, right? The flip side was, at that point, the software providers had, especially on this what we call point of care side, had not really delivered. I think they used to go down a lot. They were unreliable. They were clunky, not easy to use, particularly for carers. So I would say it was that real pain point. Having something that was genuinely really easy to use, but also investing the time to really think about it from a data privacy and clinical safety perspective to make it, very safe and reliable to use. Like there's partners of ours that for like 5 years prior with another software vendor had not decided to move their medications digital because they were just too worried about the risk. Only when they came to Birdie, and because of the way we'd really deeply thought about the design of the product, they were like, no, this makes sense. We feel safe with this. We're going to go live with it. And by the way, that's also one of the most interesting things about Birdie is like, we cannot afford to ever go down, because you're talking about like someone's mum or dad at home with potentially a medication that could be life critical. And so it's that level of, seriousness with which we have to take our product development.
You mentioned as well quite humbly that it's all about the team you built as well, and the team who are doing their jobs really well. How did you pick those people? I think this is one of the hardest things for all founders, to try and pick those people to be able to trust these really important jobs. How were you able to find the right people?
I mean, maybe the way to think about it is that like over my whole career, because I've had this aspiration of like, wanting to build something, I would always like remember people that I thought stood out in their role or just their work ethic or their capability, and people that I thought, okay, if I could get them on board to something that I'm doing, that would be amazing. And so that was like, I think one way of knowing that bar. And you meet a lot of people as you go through your journey, specifically if you're in like high growth startups and you're meeting people through networking. So that was one way. And there's definitely a number of people who have come to Birdie who I've worked with before, who, eventually, even after years, I've been sort of trying to get them in. I think that then helps you get a bar for, other people that you're looking to bring on board. And you can tell quite quickly in an interview process about definitely someone's competence. You can definitely probe questions and are they able to do the job you're asking them to? But secondly, and I think most importantly for Birdie, is like, can you get a really good sense of their passion to solve this problem? Because in those early days, it's as much about your like growth mindset and your resilience as it is like, your actual ability to do this specific job, because you're doing so many different things. And so it is that kind of founder mindset or like founding team mindset that you're looking for. Those were the bits that I looked for. How I found them and, how they found us in some cases. I think it is just a bit of, luck, right place, perseverance, loads of interviews. I think I think I've done thousands of interviews by this point. That's how you do it.
So after this interview, we're doing our final round of interviews for our first full-time employee.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick up any tips from you after this as well. Do you have any favorite questions you like to ask people?
The one that I always like to come back to is questions that go to their inner purpose and who they are. So things like, where do you want to be in 5 years? What really motivates you? Who's on the product side? What's inspired you on the product? Like anything that kind of gets a bit under the skin and is not like the obvious, response. Now that was in the early days. I would say now, depending on the role, we're much more precise on the kinds of questions we ask. I think the other thing is that there is a gut feel that you get, and I think sometimes we're a bit too overly processed. It's good to have that and have the frameworks and do they take these, but you can sort of get a gut feel. And if I look back at that early team, there was just a chemistry that was there. And maybe that's the other way to think about it, is it's not just the individual, but it's how does that individual fit into the overall team? Because your job is to construct the team. I'm not sure how many people pay attention to that versus, okay, that's a really good person, but will that person really fit into my team to, make this an incredible high performing unit?
And I think we had the same thing where some of the people who applied for the job, you could see the way their character traits were, where in a way it wasn't covering the gaps that we had. And that's one of the things we're looking at as well. It's not necessarily just about who's on their standalone, who's the best, but it's also if they're good at something which we already have the skills in, then it's not necessarily best to hire that person. Exactly. You want somebody who's covering the bits that we're not good at and is really good at those things.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's hard because you almost have an affinity towards people who are like you. But hiring somebody like yourself means that they don't do the bits that you're not good at.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And it's back to that point, what's the shape of this person? And even in a role, in the same role, by title, in different companies or different stage of the company, the shape of the person will be different, right? So back to my point, my job as a, chief product officer is very different when it was a team of, 5 of us versus a team of 110. So that shape needs to change and evolve. And I think a lot of people can learn to evolve that shape, but often there are some places where they're going to be stronger than others. And so, back to your point, how do you figure out what that shape needs to look like and then put people in the right places? So the analogy is a football team analogy or any team analogy. Your job as a manager is to figure out how do you make the most performant team by putting people in the right place. And I think back to my point around the early days, it was knowing that you need someone who has context of industry, knowing someone who's an incredible engineer, knowing someone who can really think about solving problems from a design perspective. If you can get those people in a room, that's incredibly powerful. And then genuinely the magic is, happening together.
So you mentioned that your job changed significantly over the last few years as well. Which areas do you think you've had to grow in personally quite a lot in order to achieve or to be effective in your new role as a much larger organization?
I think in the early days, it's all about sort of getting into the details and, I know there's a lot being talked about with founder mode right now. So, I have a view on that, but getting in the details, being with the team, encouraging them, servant leadership, etc. That's a big part of it. As the team scales, when you've got 4 or 5 teams, they're all running independently. There is much more around comms, strategy, clarity, and I think that becomes much more important because actually your job is to provide that direction and clarity. And yes, I think still get involved in the details where necessary and really support people, and I'll never lose that from who I am, but also at the right point, scale the systems and the team rather than, thinking about the product day in and day out. So that's been an interesting change. I think the other thing, which is a learning and, I'm still very much on the journey of, post Series B now, is that as a founder, there is sort of you have to be even more precise with what you're saying and the intention behind what you're saying, because it can quickly, be misunderstood, and not because you said something wrong or it was misunderstood by the person immediately, but it kind of sets off a team in a certain direction. So just being very intentional. And again, those are skills that I don't think you naturally have if you're a early stage founder. So you have to grow this quite a lot.
So you said you had some thoughts on founder mode there. So you just teed me up for the next question there. So what's your thoughts there?
I think there's a balance to have, but I think there is an opportunity for people to get much more involved as founders in the detail. And I think from a couple aspects. So one is you often know you have an intrinsic understanding of the problem space and the solution because you've been spending 5 or 6 years on it. And so you can imagine when someone new comes along and it is a professional role, it takes a while for them to ramp up to that. That's one element. I think there's a second element of maintaining the sort of pace of innovation and excitement and sort of what can we do next with the technologies that are coming. And then the third thing, which I think is somewhat, we don't talk about, but like there's all these systems you put in place, OKRs, KPIs, etc. And you think you can manage the OKRs and KPIs, and you should have those things. But there's also, I think, just like a ruthless focus on execution, prioritization, and like checking in and status updates. And in our case, for example, I think we've moved back to more like weekly check-ins with the teams, or weekly demos of where the product's going. And I've always believed that high feedback loop and like cadence in the way that the teams work leads to more output over time, right? You just learn quicker. And so that's one area of Founder Mode that I'm probably leaning into more. There's different versions of this, I think. So it's just what works for you.
So obviously, as you said, Birdie's been around for several years now, been growing significantly, had your Series B. What are the biggest wins you've had so far, and what are you most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest wins are really just helping more and more, care recipients, having partners, continuing to grow. We're very, very lucky to have some of the most prestigious sort of home care brands in the country, working with us. I think now starting to, in addition, use the data we're collecting to drive more and more policy. It takes a long time, but I think, the UK particularly, obviously the healthcare system is really struggling. Social care is hugely sort of underrepresented. And so just being very close to those industry leaders and supporting them, people who've been in this industry for 30 years with, the technology, the data we have is like very rewarding. Sometimes I don't reflect on it enough, but that's an amazing part of what we get to do.
Have you got any idea of how many patients or how many carers you've helped?
Yeah, I mean, look, on a monthly basis, we do about 5 million visits, and we have about 70,000 patients on the platform and about 50,000 carers. So in terms of volume, it's really, really, grown substantially over the last 5 years, and in a very, very short time period.
And then looking to the future, obviously Birdie's done so much good already. What do you hope Birdie will be able to achieve in the next few years?
Yeah, so I think on the for the consumer themselves, or someone who's a patient or their loved one, it is really about giving them a much better experience of the whole aging journey, right? From the early days of, services, content that can help them understand what's happening and get that support in a more frictionless way. And then over time, obviously making it easier for them to find the care they need, be assured that the care is of the right quality, etc. So, I think what's fascinating about where we are with healthcare generally is that generative AI is transformational, particularly in healthcare, because everything is so textual. And so the ability to really comprehend that and process that in a world where the number of doctors, the number of district nurses is decreasing, and our population, particularly our aging population, is increasing, is something we will have to invest in. So that's the bit that excites me most in terms of the opportunity we have in the sector.
So time to move to 5 questions now. Thanks so much for coming on. First question is, if people want to find out more about you and more about Birdie, where should they go to?
Yeah, so personally, I'm on LinkedIn. That's the place I, do a little bit of posting. Birdie, just check out our website, birdie.care. There's loads of information there. If you're interested in, joining us, you can have a look, or supporting us in any way.
And is there anything that you need help right now, or that the audience could help you with?
Definitely from an audience perspective, people that have maybe been through this next journey, how to navigate that. How to balance the investments in sort of scaling your business, continuous innovation, that would be a massive area. I think also just connecting with founders who are further down, through the journey is always incredibly valuable.
So again, thank you so much for coming on. And you can see my voice is kind of given way a few times in the last few minutes, but have you got any final words?
No, I don't actually. I think it's been really great to be here, and thanks for, inviting me on to have a conversation about what we're doing at Birdie and the journey that I've been on throughout my career and life.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.